Okay. All right. Welcome to video number, what is this? 5 of the Essential Tech Tips series. This video should be kind of interesting because I am mostly presenting an idea, and I sum up that idea, or to myself, what I call this idea is interior versus exterior, or more so covered versus exposed. Because whenever I look at machines and hardware, something always hits me, and this usually happens no matter what I'm looking at. Even when I'm looking at computers or a fire truck or something, anything mechanical, this is something I think about, and that is that there's always, forgive me for putting this so simply, but there's always an inside and an outside of the machine. And typically, this might sound so obvious, but typically the functionality and the whether it's the engine or the motor or the tooling or whatever it is that's in the machine that sort of defines that machine as a mechanical device is usually on the inside, right? And the outside are usually the coverings, like on this concept bike, it's the long body parts, this carbon fiber kind of cowling that comes forward, the windshield, the fairing here covering up most of the engine, but the inside is, let me find a good example. The inside is where the business happens. So the inside of this motorcycle would be this exposed engine, right? It's where on this motorcycle, the inside, the functionality, the tidbits, the nitty gritty, all the devices and tubes and cables have come to the outside for whatever reason. They're visible. And there's all manner of combinations of this on this drilling rig here. The teeth, the business end of this drill, or this, I think it's maybe a trench digger or some kind of oil drilling device. Anyway, the business end is all out in the open because that's what's used. And there's no real reason to cover up this other part above the saws or the rotors here because of whatever reason. Maybe they need to get to this machinery. There's no reason to beautify it. It's not made for aesthetic reasons. It's all pure functionality. So with all the machines, I find that there's always a different kind of combination of covered versus exposed. And it depends on what the machine does, who uses it, what's it for, what's it made out of, etc., etc., etc. So just to go to the opposite ends of the spectrum, this I feel like is almost 100%, this crane here is almost 100% exposed. All of these, sure, there's some casing and some support beams that are so thick that they look like they're flat and they're covering things, but really that's just bare metal that, well, it's been painted, but it's metal that is support beams for this big structure. When you look in close, you have a little operator's bay or operator's nest or whatever it's called that is covered in windows and has a little roof on it, probably for rain and stuff like that. But everything that this machine does has been visually and visibly brought to the surface. You can walk around it. So all these walkways, gangplanks, and rails or stairways, and these ladders, they're all over the place. There are lights out on the surface to illuminate it, probably because it's a big industrial situation and they need to work at night. The down here, I'm pretty sure there would be wheels that connect this to a rail, and it's all out in the open. Everything that this machine does, look, the concrete weights in the back here to offset the crane and balance it, they're all in the open. These ties, these huge metal rods, are just out in the open. There's no reason to hide the functionality. So to me, like in this this example in my mind is kind of like, almost 100% exposed, or 100%, the functionality is 100% to its at its surface. Construction equipment's usually a good example of this because they're on this big crane, or I think this has an oil has a drill attached to it. Let me see if I can find a bigger picture. Sorry, give me 1 second. Let's see, here's a slightly better one. Construction equipment's a great example of this because even though, if we saw the rest of this vehicle, the engines are covered, the operators' chairs and controls are covered. I don't know what's going on inside here other than I assume there's a giant engine and all kinds of fun, cool detail. But almost everything else is just exposed. And one reason for that in this example is that these kinds of machines are built purely for functionality and very kind of high order specific functionality. Like they have to be really powerful and they have to do one job very, very well, like scooping dirt. This whole arm is a tool for excavating, large, heavy, bulky either trash and refuse or heavy dirt, whatever it is. So I think there's a lot to this subject, and you forgive me if I talk about a lot of things at once, but this is kind of a video where I'm more proposing an idea of something that happens in hardware that I see, rather than kind of giving you perfect instructions and rules on how to follow it. So motorcycles are another great example of this because of the way they're built and because of the way we use them, i.e. they're meant for a human controller. There's a nice comfortable chair here, and there are handlebars in the front that you need to grip. This part up here is all made to be interfaced and be touching a person. But all this stuff, aside from the foot pedals and the gear changers, this is all business down here. This is all pure functional machine that's exposed to the air. Yes, there are plenty of motorcycles that have fairings and plating that cover the machine, that can be designed for aesthetics like this. This is, really, really cool. But for whatever reason, they're not covering the chain gear here, and it's right next to this covering is some exposed tidbits. So, as I was saying, there's all kinds of combinations as to how this idea kind of manifests itself in different machines. When we use a computer, it's almost totally covered in a box, and we can't see what's going on unless you have one of those computer cases where you can see inside and see the machinery. So this comes up in all manner of ways. There's also examples like this where it's not just an engine or a motor. For example, up here you have like some goggles and some cameras and probably some infrared detection and radars or whatever it may be, and that will look a certain way. And even though it's housed in a nice clean cover, down here you start to see how the machine comes together, and you see these different segments that are bolted together and they need to move so they're exposed to the air. And then you come back here, you see the hole where all that stuff goes inside of, but then we're met with more of the body of the machine, the outside of the machine. So right here it's exposed versus covered. So for the sake of not wanting to ramble too much, I'm going to go on to some a couple more examples of this, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the idea and also why I think it's important. I think it's important because I see it missing a lot in certain kinds of hardware concepts or certain designs. And when it's missing, I feel like it makes the machinery and the tech and the hardware a little less believable. And I feel like sometimes there can be an absence of consideration for what's going on the inside of the machine, or what's making the machine work. And what is the purpose of the machine, and how do all those things kind of come together to be a cohesive, cool, and functional design. So it doesn't always have to be an exposed engine that I'm talking about. This machine is obviously a gigantic bulldozer, and we have some big actors here in the design. We got these big treads that are just made for travel, and they're meant to move a gigantic machine over various kinds of terrain, so they're very thick and tough, and they're exposed. Like, this is pure functionality exposed to the air. We can even see the rivets that hold it together. We can see the clamping and the bolts that hold the engine in place, and so on. Or the wheels in place, sorry. We also see gigantic exposed pistons here, because this thing has one job, and it's to move this big ass shovel right here. That's all this thing is. It's a big ass shovel. And so the priority lays within these pistons being able to move the arms, which all hinge here. And down here at the where the scoop connects to the boom, I think it is. And this stuff is really prominent in the design. And so this isn't, as I said, it's not necessarily the engine coming out onto the surface of the design, but it's the functionality of the design coming out onto the surface. Here's one where we sort of don't see that. It's a similar vehicle / machine that is obviously has a big kind of job to do. It's large, it covers a lot of ground, and I think this is a paver or something that has to do with building roads. And we don't see what the bottom does, but this segment down here that's touching the ground. Whoops, sorry. But we do see not that. We do see that some of the machine functionality is being expressed in that there's clearly like a large engine in here with big exhausts, and it's meant to be used and controlled by a person, hence the small ladders and the railings up here. But there's this huge segment that's touching the ground, and so we might be able to infer what it does, even though we don't see the mechanical device doing what it does. So this one's kind of a blend, and it's again, this is an example of why this is more of I'm proposing an idea or a way to look at machines that doesn't have a yes/no answer or a black and white definition. It's more of a concept that I want you to start thinking about, because I really do believe it'll add to your designs. So dune buggies are a great example of this, because They're notoriously cool looking, and they're always exposed and have a lot of their engine and their functionality on the outside, because usually they are, meant for one purpose. They're meant for hauling ass through the sand or the dirt, having a lot of fun in, and getting there just as safely as you need to. So we have some covering on the bottom, probably for the driver, so that rocks and stuff doesn't shoot up inside of it. We have a covering over here over the engine probably, but there's still a lot of this machine being exposed, if you will. All these shocks and suspension are exposed here. The roll cage itself is to protect the driver, obviously. And I also think, my guess is that since these are supposed to go fast and hard, and even flip around without getting hurt, either hurting the machine or the driver, that they leave the covering and the body off of these things, I'm assuming sometimes, to make it lighter and not encumber the device with unnecessary material. So here's an example where we see inside. I mean, even right here, we might be seeing some of the steering apparatus, or I'm not sure what we're seeing. Yeah, that looks like the steering rod right there. Anyway, and more shocks and suspension poking their heads out down here. And here's kind of a fun in-between example where the vehicle has headlights. It's meant to go, out inside, out in the wilderness, in the hills or the desert, and you want to be able to have fun at night, so it has flat headlights, but there's no body and no nice chassis to put them inside of, so they're really sort of just hovering out here and attached to the front however they need to be. So I'm going to just run through quickly just a couple more examples and talk about the things that I see in regards to this. So another dune buggy, another very similar example, lots of functionality being exposed here. We have the bars in the front probably to just keep, and I think what's a undercarriage like covering to protect the engine and certain parts from dirt and mud and flying rocks and everything. But in the front, it's all business. This is two huge shocks, and all the attachments to the wheels and the shocks exposed. And back here we have the same on the back wheels, and there might be a drivetrain back there like there are on trucks, but I'm not sure where that is. And I hope I'm using the right terminology. Funny enough, I could probably know a lot more about motors and technical construction parts in terms of like terminology and exactly what leads to what, but I've been faking it all this time, and it hasn't bit me in the butt yet, but it's fun knowing exactly what's what, so I'd like to know more. It looks like on the top here, this might be some kind of radar or sensory piece of equipment, because this is military. And again, it's just bolted to the top here. There's no pretty casing or body or stealth plating or anything. It's just bam, it's just stuck right to the top. And I'm pretty sure this is a gun that has a covering on it, and the back seat here is for the driver. So all this stuff is out in the air. It's in the open. There's no body. There's a hood here covering the engine, sure, but it looks like they cut a part out of it to expose what I'm assuming is another weapon, or maybe another tool for detection or night vision, or who knows, but this thing is all business. So it's more functionality versus form. It's more business versus shape. It's like all you're seeing is functionality here, and it's all out on the surface. Here's another great example in that the shuttle, we've all seen space shuttles, and usually they have they look like a big heavy airplane, because that's a lot of what their job is. They have to get in and out of the atmosphere. So You have the nice nose here and all the front's covered, and of course the bottom and the wings are covered because they're aerodynamic shapes, and the bottom's covered in heat absorbent ceramic tiling, and there's a clearly a definitive hull to this thing. But these hatches are open and it's showing its payload. I don't know if it's probably bringing a part up to a space station to add on. But here we see a wonderful example of covered versus exposed. So covered is the exterior hull, all the material over these engines, but then you have literally a bay opened in the middle. So we see the cargo or the transport section, and we also see these plates and these coverings that make up the whole section. So here's a great example of being able to see how these layers make up the chassis or the hull. And also we see all these kind of details and fun devices and clasps and sections and all these different things on the interior that all have functionality. And I think this is an arm as well coming out to help move this thing, although the perspective's making it so I can't see exactly what it does. So this video, I am aware it's sort of turning into more of a talk, but I think that, and I will do an example in some sketches, but I think it's worth looking at this, because when you consider your mechanical designs, when you're working on how to build an imaginary machine that has functionality, it looks cool, it looks like it works, it has a certain personality, I think it's extremely worthwhile to hold the inside and the outside of your machine in your head as you're designing. You hold the functionality, what it is, and you hold the idea of when should this machine be more exposed, what's it being used for, in your head as well. So, for example, this very, very simple water tank truck, water delivery truck. There is one big tank here, very simple shape, but right here we have some of this cool machinery coming to the surface. There's probably some pumps and some piping that have to do with loading and pumping the water in or out. Containing it, accessing it. This looks like a hose connection that you can tie a hose onto. There looks like an axis or an axle here for the whole entire truck, so that this back portion can probably turn independently of the front. Some sort of tank here that I'm not quite sure. Maybe it's got gas to, I don't know, run the pump or help run the pump. I'm really not sure. Back here we have a little bit of exposure with the hose connections and probably a spool for the hose to be used. So it's not all just a clean tank and then one hole in the back. There's a lot to this, even though it's just a big water tank. I came back to this photo because it's a great example of what I'm talking about. I mean, this is the weapon payload section, where I'm assuming it can either hold different missiles or bombs, and either hold them while they're being launched or just drop them. I'm not sure exactly what, but we don't see inside this machine except for when it opens up. So I think just being aware of the inside and the outside of your machine, how these different elements come together and for what reasons, think it's very, very valuable when you're thinking about mechanical designs or when you're working on them. So, I want to wrap this up pretty shortly at the risk of repeating myself and talking in circles. So in order to do so, I would just ask that you think about this idea. You consider it. You consider when the machine's being exposed for whatever reason, whether it's a choice, and that's why people like the machine that way. There's a reason to have certain things exposed for functionality or aesthetic reasons. There's a reason to have things exposed purely because it's pure function, or if you want to have the inner workings and functionality of your machine hidden or obscured for any reason, whether it's a commercial product or it's a functional device that you don't have to see inside everywhere. You can see just the outside and the hull and what's on the outside without needing to see a lot of the inside. But if there are cases of needing to see the inside, that you know what to do and why you're putting information or detail, like say this loading ramp right here, a little bit of detail starts to come out when we see sort of inside this plane, right? So all these examples are kind of different. All these examples are sort of might seem very obvious or might seem kind of confusing depending on what they are. This is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. We have the smooth hull outside of the plane. We see the propellers, which is sort of some of the functionality, and we see the jet port, the exhaust port back here. Sorry, not jet port, but I think it's exhaust. We sort of see this machine sitting on the outside, but it's covered for the most part. But inside, this is a cargo plane. So we see the hull and the supports and the ribbing and the track on the, or tracks on the loading ramp. We literally see inside the machine. And it's funny because this example, they're almost opposite. The outside of the plane is so simple and smooth, and the inside is just a sea of detail. It's pretty nuts, really. I mean, we're seeing the plane itself. We're seeing all this functionality, like the pistons that lower the ramp. We're seeing these rollers and these tracks. We're seeing the grip tape and the bolts and everything that this plane needs to do its job. We're seeing it. It's on the surface. Even these hooks for loading and holding on to cargo, different kinds. Who knows what all those hooks are for? So that's all I would ask is be aware. Be aware of whether we're seeing the inside or the outside or both of your machine. Because I think it'll make your design stronger, and I think that you will have more control and flexibility when you're designing different things. You'll be able to make better decisions and not simply throw things around for no reason. You'll be aware of what you're doing, even if you're not great at it. I'm not great at it, but I'm aware of it and I'm trying to use it to my advantage. I've found that as I was looking at reference, here's a funny example. It's like an exaggerated, all this machinery is exposed, these weird custom tracks and the triangle tank treads with these forked supports for the wheels. and then you just have a normal truck body up here. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous, but this is the contrast I'm talking about: the inside and outside, the exposed versus covered. There's always different reasons and for it, but I found that the reason I'm making such a big deal out of it is because I've found it to be true even on the most mundane, some of the most mundane examples. Some of the most everyday machines have this kind of thing happening. And so I think it applies, even if it's not really loud and on the surface, I think it applies so often that it's worth me talking about, and it's worth you giving it some thought. So, for example, this water truck, it's like I was saying earlier, we have this gas tank out on the surface and these hoses, and probably a pump is back here. And it's just for water, it's just for water. The reason I emphasize that it's just a water truck is that this isn't some space colony radioactive waste transporter. This is an old modern day truck that moves water around, yet it has all this crazy exposed machinery on the back because it needs it to do its job. As another sort of everyday example that I want to mention, and I'm just looking for the photo now, and that is a sort of a similar thing, which is gasoline trucks. This is another water truck. Here's a gasoline truck. We've all seen these trucks on the highway. We've probably seen them at the gas station delivering gas. But when you look at the exposed parts of the machinery and the things that come to the surface because of the functionality, it's pretty cool stuff. Like, look at these big, I don't know whether that's steel or what, but these huge gaskets for these huge connection ports for the hoses, this long, thick ribbed. Look at all this ribbing and these clasps and the clamps that keep this thing watertight. This really cool, like, I would have never guessed that the gasoline delivery port thing is this cool. And I mean, look how thick and heavy these covers are just to get to the underground tanks. And this is on a truck that we see all the time, every day. So just keep this kind of thinking in mind. Keep in mind. And I would also say one last thought, which I have this thought a lot, actually, which is that even on a very slick, aesthetically oriented design, like, say this, I think it's a Lamborghini. It's totally custom made. It's got a carbon fiber shell. Is this a Ferrari? I don't know what. Anyway, look at this beautiful aerodynamic structures. What's this? We still have some exposed machinery. This is a disc brake, and the pads are in here, and this leads to all this stuff connecting to it inside. So on this one, it's not terribly loud or obvious, but there's still a little bit showing, right? And knowing that even on on a case like this, that it's still present, I think will help your mechanical designs, because if you're aware of this logic, you'll have the choice. You'll know that, this internal machinery and these details and things like this, what's going on under here beneath the fender or behind the fender. If you know there are going to be parts of the machinery kind of poking out, I think you'll have more control over your designs and you'll make cooler ones. This is obviously a photo of a crashed truck, but I think this is a great example of what I'm talking about, is that the top of the truck that we don't see here is fully covered and looks like a normal everyday truck. But if you just look underneath, you'll see all this machinery and all these axles and drivetrains and suspension and bolts and nuts and also disc pads and so many details. So that is 35 minutes of me blabbering. And, you know, I know it is long. I know it's a lot of info. And I'm trying to explain something that I see subjectively, and I'm trying to put it in cold, hard terms that you can just ingest and consider as time goes on. And, you know, typically I think if I had been talking for 35 minutes on another topic, one that was a little more straightforward and clear cut, I'd probably cut this video and I'd either edit it way down or I would possibly even redo it. But because I think that this subject it's such a nuance, it can be a nuanced gray area when you're designing machinery that and I do think it's prominent in almost every mechanical design you could do. I think it's really worth the time listening to me sort of ramble on about it. And it's worth considering it and trying to maybe, if you haven't been looking at mechanical designs like this before, the inside versus the outside, the covered versus exposed, the functional versus non-functional, I really do think it's very worth your time to consider it, to kind of try and get yourself to look at machinery and hardware in this context. And so I'm going to leave the intro / talk that I've done. I'm going to leave it as it is and kind of in an effort to communicate that this is how important I think it is and how valuable I think it is to just start looking at devices in this regard. And with that, I want to end with this very, very one last simple example, which is, I didn't even know about these. I learned about them looking around for photos. But these are portable gas tanks that you can put in your back of your truck. And it's a, like a large flatbed truck. And all it is just so you have extra gasoline on you, whether it's for your own car or someone else's. And look how much intricate mechanical detail is happening on the handle here. Let me open this up so I can see if I can zoom in any more. Whoops. So that's about as big as the photo is, but look at how much, look at the sealant on the rubber hosing. I mean, this is just a random, device you might throw in the back of your truck, and there's a big tank inside the steel casing. But look at these access ports and these gaskets. Look at this device right here that pumps. Like, it's a tiny engine because it pumps the gas out. And of course, you have the gas dispenser and the nozzle under this covering and everything. Look how cool this little functional part of the whole machine is. And it's right out in the open. So something as simple as that is going to have some exposed machinery as well. Okay, that's it for now. Thank you for hanging in for this talk. And I know I can get kind of wordy sometimes, but I hope it's just allowed you to think about something that you may have not have been thinking about, look at things in ways you might not have been thinking about, and just remember that, say, a big plane like this that's huge and we've seen a million times has parts that are this intricate and this mechanical when you get up close to them. Those two realities can be on the same design. Okay, I hope all that made sense, and let's move on to a quick demo, because I'm sure you're wondering, how in the hell could I have talked so long about this? Let's do a demo.